Tupelo, Mississippi, 1941. The heat arrived before dawn and stayed until long after dark, thick and wet like something you could hold in your hands. It pressed against the wooden walls of the shotgun house on Old Saltillo Road, seeping through the cracks, settling into the fabric of worn clothes and thin mattresses. It made everything slower, walking, thinking, breathing. Elvis Presley was 6 years old and he barely spoke. Not at home, where his mother Gladys moved through the 2 rooms like a gentle storm, humming hymns while she cooked, while she cleaned, while she mended clothes by lamplight. Not at school, where he sat in the back corner of the classroom, eyes down, hands folded, pretending to be invisible. Not at church, where gospel voices rose like thunder, and he mouthed the words silently, feeling them in his chest but unable to release them into the air. He had a twin brother once, Jesse Garin, born 35 minutes before Elvis, stillborn, buried in an unmarked grave. Gladys never spoke about it directly, but Elvis felt the absence like a shadow that followed him everywhere. Sometimes he wondered if his voice had died with Jesse, if he was supposed to be quiet because his brother would never make sound. The schoolhouse was a single room with windows that didn't close properly, and a potbelly stove that made the air shimmer in winter. 23 students from 1st grade to 8th, all crammed together, the older ones in back, the younger ones up front near Miss Grimes, who had taught in Tupelo for 19 years and had the tired eyes to prove it. Elvis sat at a desk that was too big for him, his feet dangling above the floor. The wood was carved with initials and crude drawings from students who'd come before. He traced them with his finger during lessons, memorizing the shapes, imagining the hands that had made them. "Elvis," Miss Grimes said one morning during arithmetic, "can you tell us what 7 plus 5 equals?" He knew the answer. He always knew the answers. But when 22 pairs of eyes turned toward him, his throat closed like a fist. The numbers existed in his mind, clear and certain, but the pathway between thought and speech was blocked by something he couldn't name. "Elvis?" Miss Grimes prompted again, not unkindly. He opened his mouth. Nothing emerged except a small breath that might have been the beginning of 12, but died before it could take shape. A boy in the back row laughed. Another joined in. The sound rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. "That's enough," Miss Grimes said, but the damage was done. Elvis felt heat rush to his face, felt his hands begin to shake. He looked down at the carved desk and wished he could sink through the floor, through the earth, into wherever Jesse had gone. At recess, he stood alone under the oak tree at the edge of the schoolyard, while the other children played. He pressed his palm against the rough bark and listened to the cicadas sing their endless summer song. They never stopped, never worried about who was listening, never felt ashamed of their sound. He wanted to be a cicada. Her name was Eleanor Brennan, though everyone called her Miss Eleanor. She taught music once a week to the younger grades, traveling between 3 different schools in Lee County, carrying her sheet music in a leather satchel that had belonged to her father. She was 42 years old, unmarried, from a family that had money once but didn't anymore. She played piano at the Assembly of God Church on Sundays and gave private lessons to children whose parents could afford the 25 cents. Most couldn't. She first noticed Elvis on a Wednesday in October. The children were supposed to be singing "Amazing Grace," a song so familiar that most of them could perform it in their sleep. Miss Eleanor played the introduction on the upright piano that had been donated by the Baptist Church when they'd gotten a newer one. The children opened their mouths and produced the usual chaos of off-key enthusiasm. But in the back corner, near the window where dust motes drifted through afternoon light, there was a small boy who wasn't singing at all. His mouth moved silently, forming the words without sound. His eyes were closed. And his right hand, Miss Eleanor noticed this particularly, was tapping against his thigh in perfect rhythm, not just keeping time but adding something extra, a syncopation that shouldn't have been there, but somehow fit. After class, she asked Miss Grimes about him. "Elvis Presley," Miss Grimes said, shaking her head. "Sweet child. Smart as a whip. But you'll never get a word out of him. He's been here 2 years, and I've heard him speak maybe a dozen times. Always in a whisper. Parents are good people. Poor but good. Mother dotes on him something fierce. I think he's just painfully shy. Does he like music? I couldn't tell you. He doesn't participate much in anything." But Miss Eleanor had seen his hand, had seen the way his body swayed almost imperceptibly, had seen something alive beneath the silence. The next Wednesday she brought a guitar. It wasn't much, an old Gibson she'd bought years ago from a traveling salesman, the finish worn smooth in places, one of the tuning pegs slightly bent. But it held its tune and had a warm, gentle sound that filled a room without demanding attention. She didn't announce what she was doing. She simply sat on the stool with the guitar in her lap and began to play a simple melody. Nothing the children would recognize, just a pattern of notes that created space and possibility. "Sometimes," she said to the class, "music doesn't need words. Sometimes it's just feeling. Close your eyes and tell me what you feel." Most of the children squirmed and giggled, but when Miss Eleanor glanced toward the back corner, Elvis's eyes were closed, his face completely still, his hand tapping that same complex rhythm against his leg. After class, she approached him while the other children filed out to recess. "Elvis," she said quietly. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "I noticed you keeping rhythm during the song. Do you like music?" He nodded, barely. "Do you ever sing? At home, maybe? Or at church?" A tiny shake of his head. "Not even when you're alone?" He considered this. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Sometimes. When nobody can hear." "What do you sing when nobody can hear?" "I don't know the names. Things from the radio. Things from church." "Would you like to learn how to play guitar?" His eyes widened. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both together. Then he shook his head. "Why not?" "I can't," he whispered. "Can't play or can't learn. Can't be loud." Miss Eleanor set the guitar gently on the desk between them. "This is the secret about music," she said. "It doesn't have to be loud. It can be as quiet as you need it to be. Music is about truth, not volume. And I think you've got truth in you, Elvis Presley. I can see it in the way you move." He looked at the guitar like it was a living thing that might judge him. "Will you do me a favor?" Miss Eleanor asked. "Next Wednesday, will you stay after class for just 10 minutes? I won't make you sing. I won't make you perform. I just want to show you something. Can you do that?" He thought about it for a long time, then nodded once, quickly, before grabbing his books and fleeing toward the door. The lessons began in secret. Every Wednesday after music class, while the other children spilled out into the October sunshine, Elvis stayed behind. At first, he just watched Miss Eleanor play. She didn't push him. She simply demonstrated chords, showed him how the strings vibrated, explained how sound was made from tension and release. The third week, she placed the guitar in his lap. It was too big for him. His arms could barely reach around it. His fingers were small, and the strings hurt when he pressed them down. But when he strummed, tentatively, accidentally, the sound that emerged made him go completely still. "There," Miss Eleanor said. "That's your voice too, just shaped differently." Over the next months, she taught him 3 chords. Just 3. But with those 3 chords, Elvis discovered he could make something that felt like freedom. His fingers moved slowly at first, uncertain, pressing too hard sometimes, or not hard enough. But gradually, through November and December, and into the cold January of 1942, he began to find the patterns. He never played in front of anyone else. The lessons remained private, happening in that empty classroom while Miss Grimes supervised the other children at recess. Miss Eleanor never asked Elvis to sing. She never asked him to perform. She just gave him tools and space, and the quiet knowledge that she believed he had something worth expressing. At home, Elvis began humming more. Gladys noticed. She'd catch him in the yard, hanging laundry or feeding the chickens, and he'd be humming melodies she didn't recognize. Not hymns exactly, but something that had their shape, their longing. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked once. "School," he said quietly. She smiled, ruffled his hair. "You got music in you, baby. Just like your daddy." Vernon played a little guitar himself, mostly at gatherings, never professionally. But Elvis had inherited something from both of them. Gladys's ear for gospel, Vernon's sense of rhythm, and something else that was entirely his own. A shyness that coexisted with desperate need to express something he couldn't put into words. At church, he still didn't sing aloud, but his lips moved more confidently now, and sometimes when the congregation hit a particularly powerful moment, when the harmonies locked together and the room seemed to lift off its foundation, Elvis would close his eyes and feel the music move through him like electricity. Miss Eleanor saw it. She saw him changing, unfolding slowly, like something that had been closed for too long. In March, she made a decision. "There's going to be a spring program," Miss Eleanor said one Wednesday afternoon. "End of April. Parents come, students perform. Songs, recitations, a little play the older children are doing." Elvis kept his eyes on the guitar in his lap. "I was thinking," Miss Eleanor continued carefully, "that maybe you could play something. Not sing, just play. 3 chords, one of those melodies you've been working on. 30 seconds, that's all." "No," Elvis said immediately. The word came out louder than he'd spoken anything in months. "Why not?" "I can't." "You can. You play for me every week." "That's different." "How?" He struggled to articulate the terror. "When it's just us, it doesn't count. If other people are watching, they'll see that I can't." "Can't what?" "Can't be like other people." Miss Eleanor set down the sheet music she'd been holding. "Elvis, look at me." He looked up reluctantly. "Other people are exactly what you don't need to worry about," she said. "Other people will spend their whole lives trying to figure out who they're supposed to be. But you already know. You know it in your bones. You know it in the way you tap rhythms without thinking. You know it in the melodies you hum when you think nobody's listening. The only question is whether you're going to let fear keep that locked inside you forever. What if I mess up? Then you mess up, and the world keeps spinning, and you try again. What if people laugh? Some will. Some people laugh at anything they don't understand. But some people, maybe just one person in that whole audience, will hear what you're really saying, and that one person will carry it with them. That's how music works. It's not about everybody. It's about the ones who need to hear it." Elvis looked down at the guitar. His fingers found the chord positions automatically now. Muscle memory built from hundreds of repetitions. He could play, He knew he could. But playing in an empty classroom and playing in front of a room full of people who knew him as the quiet boy who never spoke, those were different universes. "I'll think about it," he whispered. "That's all I'm asking." For 3 weeks, Elvis carried the question like a stone. At night, lying in the dark next to his parents' bed, the house was too small for separate rooms. He would imagine himself on the small stage that would be erected in the schoolyard. He imagined the rows of folding chairs, the parents fanning themselves in the April heat, the other children fidgeting. He imagined holding the guitar, his hands shaking, his mind going blank. And he imagined walking away, staying silent, staying safe. But there was something else too, a small voice that whispered, "What if? What if he could do it? What if for 30 seconds he could be the person he felt like when he was alone with music? What if the thing that made him different, the shyness, the sensitivity, the inability to speak up, what if that same thing was also what made the music real?" He didn't tell anyone he was considering it, but Miss Eleanor saw it in the way he played during their sessions. There was more urgency now, more focus. He was practicing like he was preparing for something. 2 weeks before the spring program, she asked him again, "Have you decided?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. He strummed the 3 chords he knew, letting them ring out. Then, so quietly, she had to lean forward to hear, "If I do it, will you stand where I can see you?" "I'll be right in the front," Miss Eleanor promised. "And if I can't, if I freeze, then I'll step in. I'll play something myself. Nobody will judge you. But Elvis—" She waited until he looked at her. "I don't think you're going to freeze. I think you're going to surprise yourself." He didn't commit. But that afternoon, when he went home, he took the guitar with him. Miss Eleanor had made arrangements with his parents. She'd lent instruments before, though this was the first time she'd trusted someone with her father's old Gibson. That night, in the tiny house on Old Saltillo Road, Elvis sat on the back step while the sun set, and fireflies began their blinking dance. He played the 3 chords over and over, until his fingers ached. And then, when he was certain no one could hear, when even his mother had gone inside and his father was working late at the lumber yard, he opened his mouth and sang. Just a few notes, nothing fancy. Just melody, wordless, rising into the Mississippi air. A dog barked in the distance. Cicadas sang. The world didn't end. Elvis played the chords again and sang a little louder. April 27th, 1942. The morning came hot and bright, the sky that particular shade of blue that promised afternoon thunderstorms. By 10 o'clock, parents had begun arriving, setting up folding chairs in the shade of the oak trees, fanning themselves with church bulletins and folded newspapers. Elvis arrived with his mother. Gladys wore her church dress, the nice one, cream-colored with small flowers, saved for occasions. She'd combed Elvis's hair until it lay flat, though it was already trying to rebel in the humidity. "You don't have to do this," she'd told him that morning, sensing his terror. "Miss Eleanor will understand." But he'd shaken his head. He didn't know why, couldn't explain it, but something had shifted. The fear was still there, huge, overwhelming, but beneath it was something else, something that needed out. The program began at 11. The older children went first. Recitations, a short play, a group song. Elvis sat in the front row with the other younger students, the guitar case at his feet, his heart beating so hard, he could feel it in his ears. Then Miss Grimes was announcing his name. "And now we have Elvis Presley, who will play guitar for us." The world narrowed to a tunnel. Elvis stood on legs that didn't feel attached to his body. He picked up the guitar case. It felt heavier than it had that morning, like it had gained weight from his fear. He walked to the stage, which was really just a platform of wooden boards set on cinder blocks, and climbed the 3 steps. 40 people watched him. Maybe 50. Every parent, every sibling, every student. A sea of faces, all focused on the small boy with the guitar that was too big for him. Elvis's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the instrument as he sat on the stool someone had placed center stage. He looked out at the audience and felt his throat close, felt the familiar panic rising. Then he found Miss Eleanor's face in the front row. She was smiling, her hands clasped, her expression saying everything she'd told him. "You can do this. It doesn't have to be perfect, just be true." Elvis closed his eyes. He placed his fingers on the first chord, muscle memory taking over. He strummed once, and the sound rang out clear, carried across the schoolyard by the still, hot air. Second chord, third, back to the first. He began to play the melody he'd been practicing, the one that had no name, but had become his over the months of Wednesday afternoons. It was simple, a child's song built on 3 chords, but it was honest. And then, before he could stop himself, before fear could lock it away again, he opened his mouth and sang. Not words. He didn't know any words. Just melody, just sound, just the thing that had been trapped inside him for 6 years, finding its way out into the light. His voice was small. It cracked once, wavered. It wasn't polished or trained or impressive, but it was real. Elvis sang for maybe 20 seconds, though it felt like hours, and when he finished, when the last chord faded, there was a moment of complete silence. He opened his eyes, terrified. Gladys was crying. Her hands covered her mouth, tears streaming. Beside her, Vernon sat frozen. Then someone started clapping. Miss Eleanor, standing now, applauding. Others joined, hesitantly at first, then more confidently. Not everyone understood what they'd witnessed. Some looked confused. But it didn't matter. Elvis had done it. He'd raised his voice. The boy who played guitar that April afternoon would go on to become many things. A truck driver, a recording artist, a movie star, the biggest phenomenon American popular culture had ever seen. But something fundamental was born on that makeshift stage in 1942. Something about the relationship between fear and expression, between silence and sound, between the small voice inside and the huge voice the world would someday hear. Elvis never stopped being shy. Even at the height of his fame, giving interviews made him nervous. He mumbled, avoided eye contact, deflected with humor. Offstage, he remained that quiet boy from Tupelo who struggled to speak. But on stage he became something else. The music gave him permission to be larger than his shyness, to channel everything he felt into movement and sound and raw power. Miss Eleanor Brennan watched from a distance. She never took credit, never sought recognition. She continued teaching music in Lee County schools until she retired in 1958. By then, Elvis was the most famous person in America, and she could hear his songs on the radio as she drove between schoolhouses. She never told anyone about the Wednesday lessons. That was private. That belonged to a time before the world knew his name. But sometimes, late at night, she'd take out her father's old Gibson and play those 3 simple chords. And she'd remember a truth she'd tried to teach him, that the biggest voices sometimes come from the quietest places, and that music doesn't require confidence or fearlessness. It only requires truth. Elvis had truth in abundance. He just needed one person to tell him it was okay to let it out. One teacher, one guitar, one moment of terrifying courage. And everything changed. Not just for Elvis, for everyone who ever felt too shy, too different, too afraid. For everyone who needed permission to raise their voice. For everyone who learned that the things that make us most afraid are sometimes the same things that make us most powerful. The boy who never raised his voice became the man whose voice changed the world. And it started with 3 chords and a woman who saw something no one else noticed. A small hand-tapping rhythm in a dusty classroom while cicadas sang, and the Mississippi heat made everything shimmer like a dream. That's the echo that never stopped. That's the beginning of the legend. That's where it all started. Not with confidence or certainty or fearlessness, but with a shy child who decided, just once, to let the world hear what he'd been carrying inside. And the world listened. And nothing was ever the same again.